behalf of Pete Gastro Rajasthan, and we are lucky to have Dr. Anupam Sibbal with us. This is our third monthly theme-based clinic. Previous two have been on the celiac disease and constipation. I request Dr. Natwar Parwal to introduce our chief speaker, Dr. Anupam Sibbal, sir.
Okay. So, very good evening and happy Shivratri to all of you. I welcome all of you in third MTBC webinar today. The topic for today webinar is acute hepatitis in children, frequently asked questions. For today's topic, our guest speaker and chief panelist is Professor Dr. Anupam Sibbal sir, for which I think no need of any introduction. He is a very well-known figure in pediatric gastroenterology and hepatology, not only in India and at national level, rather at international level. He is not only active in ped gastro, rather in other extracurricular and social activities. He is the group medical director of at Apollo Hospitals Groups since 2005, and he is senior consultant pediatric gastroenterologist and hepatologist at Apollo Hospital, Delhi. He is president of GAPIO, the group of Association of Physicians of Indian Origin. He is doing many regular training activities every year, like very famous Kuvar Viren Oswal course. Since last many years, I think almost 8 or 10 years, the name of first pediatric liver transplant candidate that was done in 1998. So Dr. Sibbal is the pioneer of pediatric liver transplant in India, and since 1998 it's almost around 25 years of first pediatric liver transplant in India. He has done more than 400 pediatric liver transplants, and he is author of many books, and he is one of the very famous book which is most and best national seller have award is Your Child Ready to Face the World. So that is very interesting book. He is active in many social activities also, and he is on the editorial board of many journals and having more than 125 national and international publications. So this is about Dr. Sibbal, a very well-known figure, and we all will get benefit with the expertise of sir, and sir is very interested in liver and liver transplant. So definitely we all will get lot of benefits. To join Dr. Sibbal sir or another renowned panelist, respected Dr. P.C. Khatri sir. Dr. P.C. Khatri sir is also my teacher in Bikaner, and he is very down to earth person, always helping for his students, and his famous dialogue is Jaha Cha Waha Ra. His all students follow his path. Even I also speaks in my all talks about sir and about this very famous dialogue Jaha Cha Waha Ra. He is previously professor and head at pediatric department SP Medical College Bikaner. So we all will get the benefit of experience of Dr. respected Dr. P.C. Khatri sir. Or another panelist is Dr. R.K. Gupta sir. He is the president of Pete Gastro Rajasthan, and he is also very humble and very helpful person. He is professor and in charge pediatric gastroenterology at Jekyll Hospital, Jaipur. And today's talk or today's panel discussion, Dr. Sajan will moderate this. Dr. Sajan is very young, very active person, and academically very strong, especially in liver. And he is currently working as a pediatric gastroenterologist at Neo Clinic Children Hospital. So now, without wasting too much time, we start today's panel discussion. So over to Dr. Sajan.
Thank you, Dr. Natwar. First, I would like to thank Dr. R.K. Gupta sir, President Pete Gastro Rajasthan, and Dr. Lalit Varedia sir, Secretary Pete Gastro Rajasthan, for giving me opportunity to moderate this meet. I also welcome our esteemed panelist, Dr. Anupam Sibbal sir, a very renowned pediatric gastroenterologist in India, Dr. P.C. Khatri sir from Rajasthan, and Dr. R.K. Gupta sir from Rajasthan. Before coming to our topic, acute hepatitis in children, I would like to share that how I get to choose pediatric gastroenterology because of Anupam Sibbal sir. In 2010 to 12, I was doing my PG in UCMS and GTB hospital Delhi, and Dr. Sunil Gombar sir was my PG guide, and he asked me to attend a CME which was organized by Apollo Hospital near at CP in 2011. That time, first I have heard many topics like neonatal cholestasis, Alagille syndrome, PFIC, and pediatric liver transplant by Dr. Anupam Sibbal sir. The CME was very fantastic, and in the next 2-3 months, I have presented 2 cases of pediatric gastroenterology related topic, abdominal tuberculosis and Budd-Chiari syndrome in Delhi IP meet. Delhi IP में क्या होता है कि हर मेडिकल कॉलेज में मंथली में एक मीट होती है जिसको पीजी स्टूडेंट प्रेजेंट करते हैं, and I have presented 2 cases in IP meet, and subsequently I selected in SGPGI Lucknow and ILBS Delhi to fulfill my dream. So thank you Anupam Sibbal sir for your path, for giving me this torch light. So now we are coming to our today's topic is acute hepatitis in children, frequent asked question. The acute hepatitis we know is a very common condition in pediatric practice. We routinely see many cases of acute hepatitis. So today's discussion is actually based on what is acute hepatitis, what is the pathogenesis, clinical symptoms, what is the basic investigation we should done in complicated and uncomplicated viral hepatitis or acute hepatitis, and what are the other atypical manifestations. So our today's discussion is based on all this on this topic. So I would like to now start. Our first question is from PC Khatri sir.
Please share your slides.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Sajid.
Yeah, I am
So I
sharing.
take this opportunity to welcome our senior person, Dr. PC Khatri sir, who is always regarded by all the faculty and all the students of Rajasthan. He is one of the most humble teachers of Rajasthan fraternity, and we always regard him, and we are lucky to have his blessings that whenever we call him, he comes from Bikaner on the very same day whenever we call him for a meeting or CME or for taking examination. Second, Dr.
Thank you so
Sibbal,
much. Thank you so much.
say that in this MTBC, we are having very good attendance, and sometimes around last session we have around 200 to 300 attendees, and we are very lucky to have around 10 young gastroenterologists in Rajasthan now. So very soon we will be having more and more gastroenterology related meetings and scenarios in Rajasthan.
Thank you so much.
Are my slide visible?
They were, but now we are back to the other view.
Please share it. At present, it is not shared. Minka, please help Dr. Sajjan.
Yes, sir. Dr. Sajjan, from your laptop,
Yeah.
just click on screen share button.
Yes, I have clicked.
And I hope the slides are open in your device.
Yeah.
Just select that and click on start sharing.
Okay. There is some issue. I think
No problem, sir. I'll do it from here.
okay.
Is the slides visible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So our first question is from PC Khatri sir. How will you define acute hepatitis and how will you differentiate between acute hepatitis and chronic hepatitis?
Good evening to everybody. Good morning and good evening, Dr. Anupam, Dr. R.K. Gupta, and all my other colleagues, Parval, Natwar, and all my colleagues. So thank you for involving me in this webinar. So acute viral hepatitis, if you define, this refers to an inflammatory disorder of liver, which is usually associated with complete clinical and histological recovery within a period of 4 to 6 weeks, mostly. But some people may say even up to 6 months, if it is there, it may be called as viral hepatitis, but usually it takes only 4 to 6 weeks. The hallmark of this disease is the raise of ALT or SGPT in biochemistry, which is raised more than twice the highest limit of that enzyme. And most commonly, these are caused by hepatotropic viruses. As far as the difference between acute and chronic hepatitis is concerned, the first thing I already said that is acute inflammation in acute viral hepatitis, whereas chronic hepatitis, by definition, is a continuing inflammatory lesion of liver with potential to either progress to more severe disease, including cirrhosis, to continue unchanged or to subside spontaneously or with treatment. So we can see the difference between the definitions. If we take the prodromal symptom, so usually in acute hepatitis, anorexia, fever and vomiting and jaundice are the initial features. But if we take as in case of viral hepatitis A, in that case, what happens if jaundice appears, then usually anorexia and fever, they try to disappear. Whereas on clinical examination, in case of acute viral hepatitis, we find enlarged tender liver. And in case of chronic liver disease, what we find, the liver is small. There's a usually enlarged left lobe. It is hard in consistency. It is maybe nodular. Splenomegaly is there, but it is firm. But in acute viral hepatitis, spleen may or may not be enlarged. There is ascites, there is edema in chronic condition usually. And there may be another features like cutaneous photosystemic shunting, varicose bleeding, growth failure, muscle wasting, and other features of various other diseases which can cause chronic hepatitis. The feature of that disease is also there. If we take the difference in the biochemical, so biochemically, the hallmark of differentiation of the diagnosis of viral hepatitis or acute hepatitis is raised SGPT levels, which is more than twice to the highest level, normal levels. But in chronic hepatitis, the hallmark is low serum albumin levels. So these are the usual difference between acute hepatitis and chronic hepatitis.
Acute hepatitis, we know that acute incident or any inflammation of hepatic parenchyma. The difference between acute and chronic hepatitis is the duration of illness. If you get a patient of acute hepatitis with symptoms of jaundice and hepatomegaly or altered liver function test, usually they recovered in less than 6 months. If they don't recover within 6 months, then we have to level and look for the etiology which can cause chronic hepatitis. So the importance between acute hepatitis and chronic hepatitis is etiological point of view, because the etiology may be different in both cases, and the prognosis point of view. Acute hepatitis usually recovered well, and chronic hepatitis we have to manage and medical manage, and we have to follow up in long term. So now the second question, Dr. Menka, second question. Second question from Anupam Sibbal, sir. Sir, a 4-year-old girl child presented in OPD with history of nausea and poor appetite for last 8 to 10 days, fever for last 7 days, high grade with chills and rigor, 2 to 3 spikes per day, now afebrile for last 1 day, and history of abdominal pain in right upper quadrant for last 7 days. The girl also developed yellowish discoloration of eye with high color urine for last 2 days. So my questions are, what are the prodromal symptoms in acute hepatitis and significance of prodromal symptoms? What is the cause of acute abdominal pain in acute hepatitis? And what other history would you like to ask in this presenting complaint?
First of all, it's a privilege for me to be a part of this program. A big thank you to Dr. R.K. Gupta and to Lalit, to Natwar, to Dr. Khatri, Sajan, for putting this wonderful program together. It's always a delight to interact with colleagues from Rajasthan. There's this, a lot of interest in academics, and I've seen the evolution over the years. Now, I've been coming to Rajasthan for more than 2 decades, and I've seen how our specialty has evolved. And I'm so happy that we have so many young pediatric gastroenterologists, and I hope that there's a pediatric gastroenterologist soon in all the major cities of Rajasthan. So coming to the questions that you're asking, what are the prodromal symptoms? You have fever, you have nausea, you could have vomiting, anorexia, could have body aches, sometimes could have joint pains. What happens during the prodromal phase is the replications happening. And then as the prodromal phase ends, the child will typically develop jaundice, as happened in this case. Jaundice can get progressively worse over a few days. The urine is high colored, the stool is pale, and this clinically is classical acute viral hepatitis that each one of us is used to seeing and has been seeing for a very long time. Why is there abdominal pain? That's because the Glisson's capsule gets stretched, and that's why one gets pain. What are the other bits of information from the history that we are interested in? You would definitely want to know, is this the first episode? Because you don't want to miss out on chronic liver disease, saying if there's a history of jaundice in the past and it's come back again. We'd like to know of any family history. Sometimes there's an outbreak, and we know that outbreaks happen with hepatitis E in North India. We want to know if the child has any other medical condition that could have an impact on the treatment, on the outcome. We'd want to know what all medication the child is on. We would like to know whether the child has in the past been hospitalized or not. Of course, this is very classical acute viral hepatitis, but it's good to know about hepatitis B vaccination. It's good to know about hepatitis A vaccination, because we are now seeing more and more children who've had hepatitis A vaccination. And if they've had hepatitis A vaccination, then of course one has to think and look elsewhere. So that's really the history that we want. History of any blood transfusion, history of course, by and large, the injections that we use now, the needles are safe, but that's also an important point to consider. And also about the behavior of the child. Is the child behaving normally, or do the parents notice any change in behavior? So that's really what one would want to get out of the history. Over to you, Sajan.
Okay, sir. Sir, my question to you is, the cause of abdominal pain could be acute pancreatitis, because we know that any virus can cause acute pancreatitis in children. And the second question, should we ask the question related to autoimmune hepatitis and Wilson disease in this case scenario?
Good points. I mean, common things first. We know that children with acute viral hepatitis, and this is a classical presentation, will develop abdominal pain because the capsule is going to get stretched. Yes, pancreatitis has been reported, but the presentation there would be more focused on pain rather than anything else. In any child with acute hepatitis, you do want to elicit history that is relevant. That's why we asked about history of anyone in the family that would perhaps point towards a condition like Wilson's, whether there have been symptoms in the past, and this is perhaps a second or third episode, then that could point towards autoimmune hepatitis. So all these conditions need to be considered, but here it seems pretty simple in terms of what we are dealing with.
Truly said, sir. The importance of history is the history of prodromal symptom is very important to indicate about the viral hepatitis etiology. And second thing is, in younger children, most of the children usually present with electric hepatitis with only prodromal symptoms. So in that condition, prodromal symptoms should be asked. They may present without jaundice. So prodromal symptoms and the clinical correlation with the biochemical marker. If the LFT is deranged, so then we can label it as a acute viral hepatitis, and we should go for the serology marker. Thank you, sir.
The fever disappears as the jaundice appears.
Yes. My third question to Dr. Menka.
Menka, next slide, please. Menka, next slide, please. Menka, can you change the slide?
Sajan, you can ask the question meanwhile.
Okay. So the third question for R.K. Gupta, sir. Sir, in the above case scenario, there was no significant past and family history. On examination, icterus was present. Liver was 4 centimeter below costal margin, soft, tender, and rest systemic examination was normal. So in this case scenario, sir, what past family history and other history would you like to ask? And what physical and systemic examination would you like to look for?
Thank you, Sajjan. Very nicely framed questions. So as the part of this question have been answered by Dr. Sibbal sir, that will ask for the similar history in the past or vaccination history or family history of the similar illness, family history of the liver disease or autoimmune disease in the family. But like this, a child is around 4-year-old, and this is slightly in the less than 5-year-old child. Usually the acute viral hepatitis is asymptomatic or very mildly symptomatic. Means as various other infections may also present like this. So we have to think about malaria, dengue, scrub typhus, and enteric fever also in this case. So we would like to ask about any rash. We will look for that any rash. Or second is drug history. Sometimes in the periphery, the patient is being given NSAIDs round the clock to cover up the fever, and that may lead to means drug-induced liver injury. So we'll like to ask about the history of NSAIDs or paracetamol overdose or some ATT or anticonvulsants like that. So like the child had chills also, though the chills may be present in the hepatitis also. So we have to search for the like dengue, scrub, malaria, leptospirosis. We may even for the examination part, we'll look for the as like in a routine patient who had to do examination, especially look for pallor, lymphadenopathy. If the pallor and lymphadenopathy are present, then look for other diseases. Then only hepatomegaly is there, and that is tender hepatomegaly, soft one, that is okay with the hepatitis. And we have to see for achaemetic patches or petechiae. Petechiae presence is in favor of dengue, and leptospirosis if the patient has come from some wet area. And any edema feet is again in favor of the dengue fever. So that we should keep, especially in Rajasthan. And in for last 10 years, we are seeing outbreaks of dengue, then scrub typhus, then malaria. So we should be careful about those also.
Thank you, sir. I also want to add one point that in physical examination, we should also look for the growth failure, height and weight, and the stigmata of chronic liver disease, because we know that the autoimmune hepatitis, up to 40% of autoimmune hepatitis and 10 to 20% of Wilson disease can present as acute hepatitis, similar symptoms like acute viral hepatitis. So we have to see the underlying chronic liver disease. In sir, per abdomen examination, what you would like to see?
The per abdomen examination, as you have told, that liver is 4 centimeter and soft. So I would like to see whether the liver is firm or hard. Second, what is the size of the spleen? Is it just palpable or it is significantly enlarged? And then third, is there any presence of ascites? These are the three things. And fourth is the lymphadenopathy that we'll see for the peripheral lymphadenopathy and pallor. These are the important things. And definitely for CLD, we would like to see any visible veins or like feta hepaticus is there or telangiectasia are there. That is for CLD in case they are. So basically, head to toe examination and a thorough history. That is the crux of the diagnosis.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Now, next question to PC Khatri, sir. Sir, in the above case scenario, there was prodromal symptoms followed by jaundice with soft tender hepatomegaly on examination. What is your initial impression in this case? What are the different causes of acute hepatitis in children? And when will you consider infective hepatitis?
Please unmute yourself, Dr. Khatri.
Khatri, sir.
Sir, please unmute.
Unmute.
Yes. the first question is, what is your initial impression?
Yes,
So
sir.
naturally, the initial impression in this case is that it is acute illness, as suggested by the duration, because it is a very short duration. Second thing, I will think of infective etiology, because there are typical prodromal symptom with fever, and I will relate it to some liver condition, because there is a jaundice with pain in the right hypochondrium. So acute illness with infective etiology affecting the liver. So the first impression comes is of acute viral hepatitis. But there are other consideration also which can have similar clinical features, like malaria, salmonella infections, leptospirosis, liver abscess, etc. The anorexia and vomiting, as already pointed by Dr. Sibal, and the disappearance of fever following onset of jaundice is going more in favor of acute viral hepatitis, because continuation of fever after the onset of jaundice suggests other differential diagnosis which I have suggested. So this is very typical. One must be very thorough in taking the history, how these all symptoms has evolved. So in this case, I will think of acute viral hepatitis as the first clinical impression. The various causes of acute hepatitis in children, as we know, there are so many causes of hepatitis. Most common are hepatotopic viruses, which include A, B, C, D, E, F, and even G, TTV virus, dengue virus, torch, like so many things are there. Then there are various other viral agents which are not hepatotropic, but they can cause jaundice, like enteroviruses, Epstein-Barr virus, herpes simplex virus, HIV, mumps, parvovirus B19, and cytomegalovirus. So apart from this infective viral causes, there are so many other conditions which can also lead to acute hepatitis, like autoimmune hepatitis, SLE, cholestatic cholangitis. Then there could be various metabolic disease, as you said already. Wilson's disease could present as acute, subacute in any form of hepatitis. One must always consider. One must also consider some protozoal infection causing hepatitis, like malaria, which is very common here, and even amoebic hepatitis. Then various fungal diseases, even spirochetal disease like leptospirosis, sometimes could be the cause of acute viral hepatitis. Then, as Dr. Uh, Gupta has pointed out, drugs are also very important cause. If suppose there is history that patient is receiving anti-tubercular treatment, or patient is on anti-epileptic drug, particularly valparin, or he is using Depson, many times high doses of even paracetamol. So there are so many drugs that must always be considered, and it is a very important clinical dilemma. Many times a child receiving AED and developed jaundice, so he could have both, either drug toxicity or he could have acquired new infections. So that has to be differentiated by different tests. And there are so many other conditions like HLH, malignancy. They can also present as acute hepatitis. So these are all various causes which can present as acute hepatitis, though we know the most common cause is viral hepatitis. That is, and in that also it is hepatitis A, which is very important. And when we consider this infective hepatitis, because the onset like flu-like symptoms, which favors infective etiology, these prodromal symptom and fever. So naturally the cause should be some infection. And reference to hepatitis A, one should always take the history of family history. If suppose some other children or family members are also affected, the common source being the water, that also helps in the diagnosis. Then many times epidemiology is also important, because many times it occurs at a time in the city. So once we coming across the many cases who are having hepatitis, so any patient who's come as just anorexia, okay, or just a pain in abdomen, if we are aware that yes, this is a possibility, then probably because the jaundice appearance, as Dr. Sibbal has said, it is not, or as our coordinator has said, that it is not necessary that jaundice must appear in acute very case. So it may not be there initially, but patient has come to you, so it is your clinical judgment. So even epidemiologically, if you see the many cases of acute hepatitis are coming, then just catching one clue, one can go for as your TSGPT investigation, which will give you the diagnosis at the right time. Otherwise, child will unnecessarily suffer from the illness, or he may be given so many medicines which otherwise are not required. But in reference to hepatitis B, there may be history of some blood product transfusions. There may be family history of hepatitis B, as in vertical transmission of hepatitis B in immunosuppressed host, or in Down syndrome patient, or patient receiving chemotherapy, or drug users, or history of various, earlier it used to be very common, the IM injections when the needles were used were infected, that could have been also a important cause of hepatitis B. So all these thing, if in history is there, we'll think of infective hepatitis.
Rightly said, sir. There is a lots of cause of acute hepatitis in children. We remember viral hepatitis is most common. Up to 85% cases of viral acute hepatitis is because of hepatitis A and hepatitis E. The second point is, the sir also added that history of drug intake is very important, because the incidence of drug-induced liver is also increasing because of herbal medication. Other times intake is increased, antibiotics and NSAIDs intake, as R.K. Gupta sir said. And the pointers in favor of infective hepatitis are: fever is persisting even after appearance of jaundice. In infective hepatitis, usually prodromal symptoms are usually absent, and jaundice usually mild or may not be appear in infective hepatitis. So these are the 3 points which indicate towards the infective hepatitis. Now our fifth question to Anupam Sibbal sir: would you like to do in the above case scenario? Importance of LFT and acute hepatitis. Is PT-INR is must in all cases of acute hepatitis? What will you look in USG abdomen?
So, these are very, very relevant questions. You can turn around and say, do you need anything? And perhaps the answer is you need nothing. It's, clinically acute viral hepatitis, the child will get better. You don't really need to do anything, call them up for follow-up. Of course, in the world that we live in today, one is always worried about litigation. One always wants to be sure that you're dealing with acute viral hepatitis and nothing else. So some basic tests would be warranted. And if we look at the basic test, one would want a hemogram. Here, the jaundice is, we don't see, or you haven't commented on how deep the jaundice is clinically, but a hemogram would help, because if we've got hemolysis, then we start thinking about, is this G6PD deficiency in this child, where the viral hepatitis might have unmasked the G6PD deficiency. This child is 4 years old, but it would be of relevance in an older child that we might have Wilson's hemolysis. Of course, autoimmune can also have hemolysis. So a hemogram, basic hemogram would make sense. We would want to get a liver function test and give us an idea of how high the bilirubin is. And as Dr. Khatri was mentioning, it will show us the AST and ALT are raised. We don't expect the alk phos and gamma GT to be really high, but if the gamma GT is on the higher side, then are we dealing with something that is obstructive in its nature? We want an albumin done, which is part of the LFT, because albumin, of course, low albumin, it's an accused phase reactant, but of course the albumin is low. And if the child is not nutritionally compromised, it could be a pointer towards an existing chronic liver disease. So that would be important. Well, the LFT everywhere includes all these tests, but gamma GT is not part of the LFT in some labs. So I think a complete LFT does include a gamma GT. Should an INR be done? Well, if there is one test that's very useful, that's INR, because if the INR is deranged, then that tells us that this kid might get into trouble. because it's very important for us to be able to prognosticate, and INR is the single most important test. Why would I do an ultrasound abdomen? Really don't get any useful information unless I'm looking for other things. If I'm looking for other things, I'd get it done. Otherwise, not really. What would I find? We'll find a hypoechogenic liver, would find gallbladder edema. That is typical of acute hepatitis, but I wouldn't bother doing an ultrasound if clinically I think it's acute viral hepatitis. Over to you, Sachin. Over to you. Back to you. You have to.
Dr. Sajan, unmute.
Yeah, okay. As sir said that CBC and LFT is the basic investigation we should do in any case of acute hepatitis, and INR is must in all cases of acute hepatitis, because as per pediatric ALF guidelines definition, INR if more than 2 without encephalopathy is acute liver failure. So INR should be estimate in any case of acute hepatitis. And ultrasound abdomen, the finding of ultrasound abdomen in acute hepatitis is hypoechoic liver, periportal lymphadenopathy, and peri-GB edema. So these are the basic investigation we should do in any case of. The next question to R.K. Gupta sir: should we send all common viral serology, hepatitis A IgM, hepatitis E IgM, and hepatitis B surface antigen in every case of acute hepatitis, irrespective of age? And when do you send other viral serology like Epstein-Barr virus, enterovirus, and HSV? And third question is, when will you send second line workup like Wilson disease or autoimmune hepatitis?
Thank you, Sajjan. The first question is very important, that should we send all common viral serologies? So the answer is no. Only for research purposes or epidemiological purposes, we need all these viral serology in a routine case of acute viral hepatitis. But sometimes to explain to the patient hepatitis A/B IgM or hepatitis B surface antigen, that may be sent. But for routine management of acute viral hepatitis, there is no need of these investigations. Second, hepatitis E may be needed in older child, especially if the girl is adolescent or the boy is adolescent boy, or in the age already vaccinated to hepatitis B and hepatitis A, then we may think of hepatitis E. But if the child is the disease is going in the routine pattern, if it's not showing any danger signs, we will not need any these tests. Second, other viral serology, that is again, it is Epstein-Barr virus. It's a very unusual cause of acute viral hepatitis. HSV, enteroviruses, Coxsackie, they may cause acute viral hepatitis in newborn and very young infants. So in that case only, in case of neonatal cholestasis, when we are suspecting neonatal hepatitis, we may go for these. But in a routine immunocompetent child, there is no need of these investigations. And in these investigations are not easily available also. And for the second line workup for Wilson and autoimmune hepatitis, if there is history of recurrent jaundice or there is underlying chronic liver disease, or you are suspecting that child is not recovering fast, and there is history of the presence of hemolysis, or there is short stature, any evidence of chronicity or family history of chronic liver disease, then we will think of Wilson disease and autoimmune hepatitis. Over to Sajjan.
Rightly said, sir. The most common investigation we should for etiology purpose is for hello.
Yes.
I'm audible.
Yes,
now you are audible. Now you are audible.
So the most common etiological workup is hepatitis A IgM, and E and B surface antibody. It does not required in every case. Non-heterotropic virus serology should be there is no extra manifestation in our case. And the second line workup should be sent if the common virology etiology are negative and the patient present is a severe manifestation and jaundice or clinical manifestation are not improving, then we should think of second line workup like Wilson disease or autoimmune hepatitis. So our next question to Anupam Sibbal sir. why do younger children get more of asymptomatic hepatitis A, and why are older children and adults more of symptomatic, and why hepatitis E infection is more after adolescent age group?
So, the logic here is what applies to a lot of other common viral illnesses. In young children, they're asymptomatic. And as you get older, your immune system reacts differently. And that's why you get manifestations which are, with the going beyond the prodrome with jaundice and so on. Hepatitis E, again, might be asymptomatic in the younger population, and in the older population, it might be clinically manifest with jaundice. And again, it's related to the immune system. Over to you.
Truly said, sir. As we note, the hepatocellular injury in hepatitis A is because of cell-mediated immunity, and the immunity of the child, younger children, not so strong to mount the clinical hepatitis. So, younger children, mostly hepatitis A are usually anectic presentation, and hepatitis E is more adolescent age group because, as literature said, hepatitis A is more infectious compared to hepatitis E, and the immunity after hepatitis A infection is long. So after that, at 10 years, the seroconversion rate in literature said it is 60 to 80%, depending on the urban and the rural population. And hepatitis A infection immunity is usually short lasting. So the recurrence of the hepatitis A infection is more common and usually present after the adolescent age group. So our next question to R.K. Gupta, sir, is there any difference between acute hepatitis A and acute hepatitis B presentation? Should we send both HBS and IgM anti-core antibody in the suspected acute viral hepatitis, and any need of other viral hepatitis B serology in case of acute hepatitis B infection?
So, Sajjan, it's a very interesting, these questions are very interesting, especially for when we are searching for the etiology. So, clinically, you can't differentiate between acute hepatitis A and acute hepatitis B, because A, B, E, they may all have mild to severe presentations, and you cannot differentiate. But there are certain markers that acute hepatitis B may be slightly more severe. It may take longer to resolve. You may have skin and joint manifestations more in acute hepatitis B, and you will have some history of either needle prick injury or some kind of blood transfusion in acute hepatitis B. Otherwise, clinical course and routine, that prodrome, then the icterus and the convalescent phase, all three phases are same, and you cannot differentiate on the clinical grounds whether it is hepatitis A or B. And second question, should we send both hepatitis B surface antigen and IgM anti-HBC? So in acute viral hepatitis, as we discussed, that usually there is no need of investigations. But if you want etiology, you may have to send B, A, and E. Then hepatitis B surface antigen only shows that this child is having infection. It may be acute or chronic. If it persists for more than 6 months, that is chronic. So we are not sure whether this hepatitis presentation is because of this HBs antigen is at present it is present, or the child is carrier. Then we have to go for IgM anti-HBC. So if the IgM anti-HBC is present, that means it is acute infection. And if the IgM anti-HBC negative or IgG is present, then it is a past infection. So, but usually we do not need this thing. But whenever acute viral hepatitis case and HBs antigen is positive, and then you think that whether this is the cause or this is just coincidental finding, then you may have to go for IgM anti-HBC, and few clinicians may send both the things. Need of other viral hepatitis B serology, they are only needed when you are thinking of chronic hepatitis B. Otherwise, they are not needed in acute hepatitis B.
Thank you, sir. I want to add the two important points in acute hepatitis B infection. The subclinical episodes are extremely frequent in acute hepatitis B infection. So second is the risk of chronicity is more in acute hepatitis B infection compared to hepatitis A, where we don't see any chronicity in acute hepatitis A infection. And ALF, acute liver failure due to acute hepatitis B infection, the risk of mortality is very high. The three important things. And And the
So
need
whenever
of
whenever the
other.
child is not improving, or there are various risk factors, or you can say red flag signs, then we may have to investigate thoroughly, and we may have to admit. But in a non-admitted patient, I don't think these investigations are usually needed, unless the patient is so literate and they want actual cause of the disease or actual cause of the. It is my
And the
opinion.
other
What
thing
about?
is the need of.
Yes, yes.
And the need of hepatitis D viral titer level, sometimes it required to differentiate between acute liver failure due to hepatitis B compared versus reactivation of chronic hepatitis B carrier stage. Because
Yes.
in acute liver failure, hepatitis DNA quantitative level will be low. In ACLF-like presentation, DNA level will be very high. So DNA levels is required only in that condition. Otherwise, in simple acute viral hepatitis B, we don't require other serology, as sir said. So the next question to Anupam Sibal sir, a 8 years old boy, known case of cerebral palsy with seizure disorder, on anti-epileptic drugs on valproic acid since many years, and few months back he also took few Ayurvedic medicine for 2 months for his seizure disorder. Come in your OPD with the LP report of normal bilirubin with high SGOT, SGPT, total protein albumin normal, and negative viral serology report. No significant past and family history of jaundice and chronic liver disease. On examination, no organomegaly. My question to sir is, how will you proceed in this case? What is drug-induced liver injury? Any diagnostic criteria available for DILI? What are the different drugs which can cause DILI-like presentation? And what are other possible differential diagnoses you would like to keep in this scenario?
Right, thanks. I noticed that it's already 9:20, so I'm going to keep my answers very, very brief. So clearly, based on what you have and the test that you presented, this is drug-induced, perhaps related to valproic acid, maybe made worse by the Ayurvedic medicine. What is DILI? It's basically liver dysfunction that could be produced by drugs. It could be allopathic drugs. It could be non-allopathic drugs. It could be herbal medication, it could be food additives. Criteria, well, you would want the enzymes to be up more than, if the AST is 5 times of a normal limit, or of course in adults, and these are criteria that were developed in adults, and there was an EASL group in 2019 that did that, if the ALP is more than twice normal. And there is also this ratio of AST to ALP. If it's more than 5, then it tells us it's hepatocellular. But if it's more with ALP being high, and so if the ratio is less than 2, then it suggests that there might be an obstruction. And of course, if it's between 2 and 5, it's a mixed sort of reaction. Different drugs causing valproic acid is one. Of course, we know that acetaminophen produces that, but that's really uncommon in the Indian scenario. We are all familiar with isoniazid and pyrazinamide causing it. Nitrofurantoin can cause it. The list of dapsone, Dr. Gupta mentioned, the list is very long, but the common ones, of course, are related to anti-epileptics and ATT. Possible differential diagnosis, for any condition, the conditions that you mentioned here, Wilson's, autoimmune hepatitis, NASH, come in. Well, I don't think we're talking about NASH here. We don't know what the anthropometry of the child is. So I'm not so sure I'd think about NASH. Here it seems very clear cut, so I won't really over investigate. But obviously in an 8-year-old, if you don't have a diagnosis, you have to think of Wilson's, you have to think of autoimmune. But here it seems rather clear. Back to you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There is no diagnostic criteria for DILI. If there is any temporal correlation between history of any drug intake followed by any illness, in the absence of other etiology, then we can label this is as a DILI. Sir, I want to ask that if any child is taking ATT, how should we monitor LFT in such case to look for DILI?
Well, I more than me, I would ask Dr. Gupta or perhaps Dr. Khatri to answer that. But basically, having some amount of transaminitis we know is very common. We don't worry about it. But typically, if it goes beyond 5 times, or if the child develops jaundice, then we get concerned about hepatotoxy, and then it's very clear that we withdraw the drugs and then we reintroduce one drug after the other so that we can kind of pinpoint on what the offending agent was. It's kind of, as Dr. Gupta was trying to say, it now is very variable. You have individuals where a child is put on ATT and the family is read about hepatotoxicity, so they want an LFT done very regularly. But of course, a baseline LFT, and then they say, okay, do an LFT every 2 weeks. Let's wait for a few weeks. And I mean, there's nothing wrong in that because, honestly, if a child's going to develop hepatotoxicity and you can pick it up earlier, it's much better rather than the child develop jaundice. So that's really where one has to be a little pragmatic about it.
Sir, I would
Thank you,
like,
sir.
may I add something, sir?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Usually, as the government of India is recommending, there is no need of doing LFTs during the course unless the child becomes symptomatic or he's having anorexia or he's not having means recurrent vomitings. Then you have to investigate. But as Dr. Sibbal sir said, it is always better to go for baseline LFTs and then repeat of LFTs for 2 weeks, every 2 weeks for initial 2 months. Because if there is no hepatotoxicity in the initial 2 months from ATT, it will not develop later on. So I think that is sufficient. And 5 times of the upper limit of normal in less symptomatic or asymptomatic case, and 3 times of upper limit of normal in a symptomatic case. That is considered daily for ATT purpose, and then you should stop it. And you may restart after 7 days when LFT comes to near normal. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next question to PC Khatri, sir. What should be your ideal prescription for hepatitis A and E infection in children in your OPD? What diet will you advise? Any role of any hepatoprotective agents like UDCA, E52, Hipamide, Silaverin, antibiotics, hepatizer, and any need of isolation for such patient to prevent secondary infection?
Since this in case of viral hepatitis, usually A or E, which are very common. In fact, there is only symptomatic treatment we should recommend. For fever, as far as possible, even if you can avoid paracetamol, it will be okay. You can just do hydrotherapy for fever. If suppose vomiting are persistent and the child is not tolerating any medicine, anyway, there is no role of antiemetics. If need arises, one can add IV fluids if it is needed. But otherwise, no drugs like antibiotics or hepatoprotective agents has to be prescribed because they have no effect. But in some cases of viral hepatitis, in later period, sometimes they develop cholestasis and they can have pruritus. In case they develop pruritus, then one can use ursodeoxycholic acid, which is used full in cholestatic form, and that can help in doses of 10 milligram per kg per dose. That can be given for a few 2 weeks. And in that case, one can add fat soluble vitamins also, because that absorption is hampered during this cholestasis. But otherwise, the most important treatment in cases of hepatitis A and E is the reassurance. Explain the family about the course of illness. And also it is our duty to prevent them from going door to door from therapy to therapy of different varieties which are available for acute viral hepatitis. So in fact, what it is really needed is the reassurance and convincing the parents that what are the danger signs. For instance, in that case, we may ask them that if child has develops deranged sensorium, okay, or develops bleeding something, then certainly he must come out to the physician as early as possible. But otherwise, all these symptoms of pain abdomen, nausea, fever, anorexia, they will all go by time. And one must explain to them the various side effects which other therapy may have. Because as a clinician, it is our duty. Because most of the time it happens, they just, when we say there's no treatment, they will go away, and they will seek some other treatment from other therapies, which may be harmful, or it may be economically also not good for the parents. So it is our duty to explain these things and convince that your child doesn't need anything. That is foremost thing which we must consider in these cases, to prevent them going from uh, no therapy to so many other therapies which can cost so many things or can produce side effects. As far as diet is concerned, there are so many consumption present in the society. When there is a, they will say, don't give fat, don't give oily things, isko peele kapde mat pehnao, like that. So many things are available, but normally patient can eat normal food which they are taking normally. But one must assure, because as child is having anorexia, so naturally we must encourage the high caloric diet. And there should be no restriction of fat, proteins, or other things, which most of the time the people start observing precaution without recommendation of anybody. But many times they may ask about using of some sugar or something like, or very frequent sugar solutions. That must also be avoided, because many times they itself can lead to vomiting. So diet they must choose only whatever normal diet the child is taking. They must not try to restrict something, because child is already anorexic. But except when child develops pruritus, okay, in that case, slight restriction of fat can be advised to these patients. Otherwise, they must take normal thing. As far as role of hepatoprotective agents are there, as I already said, there is no role of any medication except of UDCA. But so many agents are available. Many Ayurvedic preparation, Epamers, Silmeramine, antibiotics, so many things are there. But as I said, one must always reassure and give them a proper health education to be away from all these medicine. As far as UDCA is concerned, as you said, this helps in pruritus because the main mechanism is the cholestasis is there. So this particular compound will replace the bile acids, which can cause apoptosis. So this this product has anti-apoptotic property, as well as it is anti-inflammatory and oxidant. But apart from this pruritus, there's no role of in hepatitis. There are many other drugs available like Silmeramine. It is antioxidant and anti-inflammatory. It is it has been investigated that in chronic hepatitis C and B, it may decrease liver enzymes. But there is no effect on viral load even in hepatitis C and B. As far as hepatitis A and other things concerned, in fact, these all drugs should be not be prescribed. Then there is a very another drug which is available, which is marketed also, Hepamers, for in cases of hepatic encephalopathy. It has a direct influence on basic mechanism of ammonia neutralization in hepatocytes. That effect is there. But as far as treatment of hepatic encephalopathy is concerned, there's no role of such medications in management of such children. So therefore, we must always avoid all these medications. That is because every drug, most of the time, they are metabolized in the liver, and already liver injury is there. So one must not add insult to the injury. So that is our main aim. Let it pass off peacefully. Then your question of need of isolation for such patient to prevent secondary infection. The infectivity of hepatitis A is there in initial 2 weeks, and 1 week after the onset of jaundice in hepatitis A. So since it is uh, is transmitted by oral fecal route, so all the enteric precautions they must be taken to prevent this spread of this disease in the family members. This includes the wearing of latex gloves when handling feces, urine, saliva, and blood. Hand washing is essential. The patient has his own bedpan, urinal or crockery, and cutlery. Isolation is continued, as I said, for the period which I have suggested. For hepatitis B, so naturally, in this case, the precautions are much more stricter, particularly in addition to what I already mentioned, there must be a prevention of hepatitis because this may transmit. So universal precautions are recommended, okay? But the gloves, preferably latex, are worn when there is a contact with blood and body fluid. Goggles, masks should be worn when there is chances of danger of splashing of or aerosol of blood contaminated secretions. A plastic apron or water repellent gown may be indicated if there is a danger of splashing. Hand washing before and after contact with blood and body fluid, even if gloves are worn, is a must. Specimens are treated as biohazard. Refuse and linen are treated as infectious. It is important to establish it that patient is in acute phase, a carrier or not. So the education of patient about this disease is very important. So anyway, these are the various precautions one must take.
Thank you, sir. Because of shortage of time, I request to all panelists to give answer in the brief. So our next question to R.K. Gupta, sir. How will you monitor an uncomplicated AVH case in your OPD follow-up? When would you like to repeat liver function test in such cases and indication of admission in acute viral hepatitis?
So thank you. It's a very, very important question. That gives answer to almost all the things. If the child is having uncomplicated acute viral hepatitis, no need to worry. Just educate them. Just give them counseling. Just give them normal diet, normal feeds, and everything will be fine. But we have to see what are the various danger signs. So I think there are 5 or 6 clinical danger signs or the red flag signs and 5 or 6 laboratory signs, like persistence of anorexia for more than 7 days, or deep means increase in the anorexia. Second, deepening of the jaundice. Third is the relapse of the jaundice. Once the child was improving, again it is deteriorating. Then presence of ascites, decrease in the liver size. Whenever you call the child every 3rd to 7th day, and if you feel that liver is shrinking, or there is spontaneous bleed, even a small nose bleed may be a danger sign. So these are the things clinically that you will look for. If the child is recovering in 5 to 7 days, that is uncomplicated acute viral hepatitis. But if the child is not recovering, or laboratory features like PT-INR, if you have done it more than 1.4, despite of giving vitamin K, or there is presence of hypoglycemia multiple times, or there is SGOT-PT, though the levels of SGOT-PT, they do not indicate about the severity, but very high levels. If it is more than 3000, you should always be careful. And bilirubin level more than 15, that is very important danger sign. So these are the things. And low serum albumin, that again shows that the child may be having either a chronic liver disease or the acute insult is for more than 15 days, so that the albumin is now decreasing. So these are the features when you should worry about these things. And the repeat LFTs, there is no need of LFTs, but if the child is not recovering, you can get LFTs repeated in 3 to 7 days. Indications of admission are the same. Whenever you are having red flag signs, go for investigations. And if the child is not able to tolerate orally, if the child is not improving, if the child is going into hepatic encephalopathy, you are seeing that this child is having slight drowsiness, alteration of the sleep pattern, or the irritability, or you are seeing that the jaundice is deepening, then you have to admit the child. Thank you. Over to Sajjan.
Sajjan, unmute, please.
Okay, sir. So our next question is based on acute liver failure. The question is for Anupam Sibal, sir. A 10 years old male admitted with a history of prodrome symptoms with history of irrelevant talk for last 2 days. On examination, ICTRES was there, no stigmata of chronic liver disease, liver 3 centimeter below costal margin, soft, tender, spleen 2 centimeter, shifting dullness is also present. CNS examination, hyperreflexia is present with normal pupillary size. On thousands, protein albumin are low, corrected INR is 3.2, 78. So my question to sir is, how do you label acute liver failure in such case? What is corrected INR and importance of it? How to identify and grading hepatic encephalopathy in older children and very young children? And is there any correlation between serum ammonia level and grading of hepatic encephalopathy? And etiology workup will you send in this case?
I'm going to do this very quickly. So the first thing is the definition of ALF you've given yourself, Sergeant, during the course of this presentation. With encephalopathy, an INR of more than 1.5 in someone who has liver dysfunction and no history of chronic liver disease, more than 2 with no encephalopathy. Clearly, we have that here. As far as encephalopathy in identification in young children, it's very hard to do that. We know that. It's a 10-year-old here. Of course, there's history of irrelevant talk. So there is some degree of encephalopathy. Correlation between ammonia and grading and severity doesn't go hand in hand, but with an ammonia of more than 100, some of these children don't do very well. Etiology workup, in our setup, the commonest, of course, remains viral hepatitis A still. So that's the commonest. So we start looking at acute viral hepatitis. Then we will, in a 10-year-old, look at Wilson. So we'll get a ceruloplasmin done. We'll get 24-hour urinary copper. We will look for KF rings. We will also look, get a hemogram done. We look for autoimmune hepatitis. And then, of course, one gets into rarer situations. But that's really what it is that we will immediately look for. There is no history of any drug intake. So that is out of the consideration here. Over to you.
Then, sir, should we send ammonia level in every case of acute liver failure?
Not really needed.
Does not. Okay, sir. The next question to you also, sir. This is based on the management of acute liver failure. What is the role of N-acetylcysteine in acute liver failure, and when should we start it, and dose of the NSC? Indication of 3% NS and mannitol in acute liver failure. Indication of FFP transfusion. How will you monitor such ALF cases in your PICU? And when you should we refer such cases to higher center with liver transplantation facility?
So as far as N-acetylcysteine is concerned with acetaminophen, everybody knows there is a clear normogram that one has to follow, and that is the appropriate treatment. It replenishes the glutathione. N-acetylcysteine in ALF, which is non-acetaminophen related, controversial, and there was a paper suggesting that it's useful. Then there was a very elaborate multi-centric trial that showed it did not change outcomes. The hypothesis there is that it improves tissue oxygenation. Some centers continue to use it, and then they would use about 100 per kilo per day. But again, like I said, at this point in time, more data is needed. So there isn't any clear-cut guidelines about the use of NAC. Normal saline 3% is preferred over mannitol. The idea is that you want to do whatever you can to decrease the intracranial pressure, because we know that is what causes cerebral edema, is what causes death in these children. So you want to prevent that happening. There is no indication for giving any plasma to children with ALF unless you are going to be doing an invasive procedure, putting in a central line, or if the INR is say 8 or 10. Of course, once you make a decision of doing a liver transplant, once that decision is made, then you can give plasma. We are very careful about giving plasma because we know that we lose the most important prognostic marker, which is INR, once you give plasma. How do you monitor? It's standard monitoring in the ICU. We don't do invasive monitoring for intracranial pressure, minimal disturbance, proper ICU monitoring. One has to be very cautious about the risk of developing an infection. So one needs to be careful about screening for infection. When should you refer a child to a higher center with liver transplant? It depends on how close the center is. If the center is close by, then you can manage on your own. And if there is worsening of INR or the encephalopathy sets in, then you transfer. But if you live in a remote area where access to a transplant center is tricky, it can take a few hours, then you should transfer as soon as possible. We have lost so many children where we get referred a child in grade 3 encephalopathy, sometimes grade 4, the child's already on a ventilator. By the time the referral happens, the child is on inotropes, the child develops multi-organ failure, and a child who could perhaps have benefited from liver transplant doesn't get the benefit. So I think it's about early referral. It's about communicating with the transplant center early, and then it's a joint decision where you and the transplant team can decide at what is the right time to transfer the child. Liver transplantation for ALF is now, of course, it's been accepted therapy globally, but it is now available in India. We've transplanted, I think, more than 45 children with acute liver failure. And the key here is that the transplant needs to be done in a matter of days or hours, so one doesn't have time. We have to work up the donor. I think the fastest we've done it has had a child in the morning, and at midnight we've transplanted this child, getting the government approval, doing all the testing, screening for sepsis, and so on and so forth. So early referral is the key. Over to you, Sajjan.
Thank you, sir. Sir, any role of ammonia lowering agent like epoximine and lactulose, Ipamers in case of acute liver failure?
As you know, again, these are all, have been tried. Most of them are anecdotal. So there isn't really any substantive data to propose or suggest their usage.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, may I ask a question to Dr. Sibbal, sir, in the continuation?
Yes, sir.
So I just want to know for our audience and for we also, what are the various pointers or the various indicators when should we think about liver transplantation in the case of acute liver failure? When should we contact a liver transplant team? And second, what may be the cost of liver transplantation and the long-term problems, so that we have to explain and counsel attendant of the child?
Excellent points. Any child where you have an INR which is worsening day on day, or the encephalopathy is worsening.
Any cutoff, sir? Cutoff of INR, anything like that?
So we use an INR of more than 4 for listing a transplant. So the child should be referred much earlier. But at 4, we will have a discussion with the family and decide that if there is worsening, this child will undergo a transplant. We start the assessment, start getting permission. If the child gets better, which has happened on a few occasions, the INR started to improve, especially with acute liver failure due to hepatitis A, we can cancel the transplant. The thing is, if we wait for too long, then a transplant is not possible because of multi-organ dysfunction. Long-term cost, about 7,000 to 8,000 rupees per month. Initial cost, and I've been saying this repeatedly and I'll say this again, for chronic liver disease, money is really immaterial. We have now been able to transplant patients who have as little as 1.5 lakhs, and we've raised the rest through some very generous donors who have given us unlimited access to money, and also through crowdfunding. For acute liver failure, it's a bit tricky because you don't have time to be able to raise money. So we do whatever we can, but the cost of a liver transplant, acute liver failure, around 15 to 16 lakhs. The cost of a liver transplant is 15 lakhs, but like I said, money is not the issue. We have transplanted patients, including from Rajasthan, with virtually zero resources.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. The next question for PC Khatri, sir. What is the indication of antiviral drug therapy in acute hepatitis B infection, and what are the different antiviral drugs available for hepatitis B infection in different age group? PC Khatri, sir.
Please
Sir, unmute.
This is antiviral drug therapy is indicated only in the immune active form of the disease, which is suggested by RAISE, SGPT, as well as sometimes SGOT. And there is evidence of fibrosis in liver biopsy and evidence of hepatitis B virus reactivation superimposed on chronic hepatitis B, because this endangers the child and increases the risk of childhood cirrhosis. So there must be definite these indication. The goal of treatment of antiviral drug is to reduce viral replication, and so many drugs are available in the market which can help, and they are given according to the age also. For instance, the interferon alpha, it is used by 1 year or more than 1 year old child. Then second drug is lamivudine. This is used more than 2 year of child. Then adifovir for children about 12 years of age. Then entecavir more than 16 years of age, and tenofovir for more than 16 years of age. So many drugs are available. We should show the age, and the particular drug should be chosen to prevent replication of the virus.
Thank you, sir.
Over to Sajan.
Thank you, sir. The next question to Sir. Sir, are you here?
Sajjad, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Dr. Sibbal need to go. So if you want, you can ask 1 or 2 questions from audience to him because he has some another meeting at 10 o'clock.
Okay, sir.
Or do you want some important question from Dr. Sibbal?
Sir,
or we can take
yes,
2-3
sir.
questions in the chat box, so that I think we should take these questions. One is very important, like IVIG in newborn with the hepatitis B mother. Can it be given in place of HBIG if it is not available?
Well, HBIG is what is preferred, but more important, and the most important thing is to vaccinate immediately.
Vaccination is there, but sir, Dr. Sarika Swami has asked that is there any role of IVIG in a newborn born to mother?
HBIG is what is to be given. I'm not aware of IVIG really. I'm not aware of any data on that.
One more question from the audience, that is there how can you differentiate clinically between acute viral hepatitis and malarial hepatitis and enteric hepatitis? Is there any clinical criteria? Sibbal sir or Khatri sir?
I would leave it to you, Dr. Gupta or Dr. Khatri, to answer that. I mean, the classical presentation we discussed at length, where there is no fever when jaundice appears, and that really points to it. Situation slightly different with enteric and malaria, but I allude to the two of you. You have more experience with that.
Sir, one question to Anupam Sibbal, sir. What are the different atypical presentation of hepatitis A infection, and how will you differentiate between prolonged cholestasis and relapsing hepatitis?
That's a very important point. We tend to see in a referral practice very unusual presentations where there's very severe pruritus, so cholestatic phase of hepatitis A, or a very cholestatic type of jaundice where itching is really very bothersome for the child is something we see. We see liver dysfunction that is prolonged for an extended period of time, where it's gone on for weeks to months. Sometimes we see where the child has gotten better and then presents again. So, whether it's a reappearance or the jaundice never really cleared but was clinically not visible to the family remains to be seen. But we see these atypical ones. Of course, you can get, some very serious problems with acute viral hepatitis A as well. Atypical manifestations. You also can see very severe jaundice when you have G6PD deficiency. I remember the highest bilirubin that I have seen in a child is 92. This child, when he would pass urine, the bed sheet would turn orange. With the G6PD deficiency in hepatitis A, because we know that 6% of the North Indian population is deficient in G6PD, is typically very high jaundice, goes up really rapidly, sometimes more than 10 or 12 in 24 hours. Also, one is concerned about renal dysfunction, and hydration is very important. Protecting the kidneys is very important. Here, there is a combination of hemolysis and the liver damage that is taking place because of the hepatitis A and G6PD deficiency. So that's another atypical presentation that one has to keep in mind.
Thank you, sir. Now, next question to R.K. Gupta, sir. What are the different causes of recurrent jaundice in a pediatric population?
So whenever we think about recurrent jaundice, the first possibility is autoimmune hepatitis, and second is the rare thing that is BRIC. So these are the two important possibilities. But sometimes the problem here is this, like even cases of anemia, the parents misunderstand with the icterus. So that should be very clear that whether this jaundice was with the yellow urine and with the increase in the transaminases and bilirubin. So I think these are the two important things.
So, truly said, sir. So important to differentiate between hemolytic jaundice and hepatocellular jaundice. So history of urine color is very important.
Urine color
To
and
differentiate
stool color
between them.
both are very important.
Stool color.
Stool color and urine color, they are very important in every case of jaundice. Yellow urine, that means it is conjugated. If it is not yellow, clear urine, that is unconjugated. So that is very important to differentiate.
Thank you, sir. So my next question to Anupam Sibbal, sir. What is acute and chronic liver failure, and how will you differentiate it with ALF, and why it is important to difference between ALF and ACLF?
Yeah, I think that's another important question, because this distinction is relevant. We are now familiar with this entity. Sometimes, diagnosis is not so easy to make. But basically what we have to look at is, you have to look at high bilirubin, you have to look at INR that is deranged, you have to look at ascites and maybe encephalopathy. And this ensues in about 4 weeks from the onset of symptoms. There is typically an exacerbation of an underlying chronic liver disease, usually by a viral infection. There's some interesting data that has come out from PGI Chandigarh. This condition does carry a high mortality, and so it's important to pick up these children and refer them at the right time, because they would perhaps need a liver transplant and they would need to be in a specialized center. As far as ALF is concerned, I think we just discussed, when to refer and what are the indications for a transplant, what's the INR cutoff.
Thank you, sir. Sir, one question from the audience. Dr. Harpreet Singh asked, what is the fluid of choice for acute liver failure?
Good point. We want to, the key here is you have to prevent hypoglycemia. We want the sodium to be in the normal range. We don't want hypokalemia to develop. So the key here is to make sure that you don't overload the system, but maintain sugar. So sometimes you have to go from 5 to 10, might need to concentrate the dextrose. And that's why when the child is in an ICU, we put in a central line, because, we really do need to give enough dextrose. Hypoglycemia is something that we have to prevent at all costs.
Thank you, sir. Now the questions are completed. So
there's just one question before I go. I read about Wilson's. How long to follow a child with Wilson's? Lifelong. After 18, they'll go over to an adult. What are the parameters we should follow up? We should just look at LFTs and just look at the general well-being. You don't have to go around measuring the urinary copper in a child who's compliant. Of course, really important to emphasize to the older child, teenager, and more importantly to the parent, that if you have Wilson's disease, do not stop medication. Do not stop medication.
The next
Thank you,
question
sir.
from
Thank you.
Dr. Rohit Khurana. How to correct metabolic acidosis in acute liver failure?
Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to go. I have a meeting in the US. Because you'd be wondering who am I connecting with at 10 o'clock at night, but it's US, it's morning time on the East Coast. So I am so sorry.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of the Paid Gastros Rajasthan, I am highly thankful to you.
Thank you
and
so much.
Again, especially thanks because we have taken half an hour more time from you.
It's a privilege.
And it has been very nice interacting with you, and a very important answer that you have given, and you enlightened us with the knowledge about the liver disorders and the liver treatment. And this fluid answer is very important. This question has been asked by Dr. Harpreet. He is the EB member for 2020 and 2021 of IAP. He has asked this question. This fluid in the acute liver failure.
So
thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank the Rajasthan Pediatric Gastro Society and of course the IAP. I remember my first session was with Dr. CB when he hosted the Pediatric Gastro Conference in 1998. So long association. Thank you so much. My apologies. So I leave it to you, Dr. Gupta, or Lalit, or Natwar or Sajjan to carry on, along with, of course, respected Dr. Khatri. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Is that so? Over to Dr. Natwar.
Over to Dr. Lalit, sir.
Dr. Natwar.
Acha, I am thankful to all of you. Dr. Sibal has already left and he has always been very inspiring. I am thankful to Dr. Khatri sir. Your bag of wisdom
But
is
sir,
always overfull.
Lalit, sorry to interrupt you. The one question from Dr. Deependra Garg is still pending. That can we differentiate clinically? I think Dr. Khatri sir can give the answer. Can we clinically differentiate between acute viral hepatitis, enteric hepatitis, and malarial hepatitis? This is the question from Dr. Deependra Garg from RHS Hospital.
Sir, unmute karo please.
Khatri sir.
Yes, anyway, we in day-to-day clinical practice, many times we come across SUT, SGPT are very much high and child is running fever. So this is very important thing to differentiate, because many times just all LFT deranged doesn't mean they are all hepatitis, which many times they are considered like this, and the basic pathology they are left away. So not only this malaria or the enteric fever, many other conditions like even other systemic infections and septicemia, all these can cause raised enzyme levels. And all raised enzymes levels, just looking at that because it is raised more than twice of the normal, should be considered viral hepatitis, is not true. So what is important to differentiate all these conditions? It requires a thorough clinical history, thorough clinical examination, and the relevance of various investigation to the diagnosis. So anyway, something which is common in all these three conditions is there is a fever and there are raised enzymes. These are the things common. But one must, since we have discussed acute viral hepatitis, and in that case we have just seen the typical clinical history that yes, fever, prodromal symptom, anorexia, right hypochondral pain, tender hepatomegaly, and once the jaundice appears, the symptoms start gradually disappearing. But in case of, for instance, say enteric fever, the fever is not going to disappear. The fever will have a very classical course when we see that the fever is not disappearing in spite of your using of antibiotics, other things. And moreover, when you go for other tests, for instance, if you go for, I think most important is going for blood culture. If it is first week, if blood culture is positive for salmonella, naturally it proves your diagnosis. But most of the time they come late and people go for Vidal test. But that is very confusing because most of the times a little raised enzyme level in Vidal, they are there in most of other situations also, and they must not take and be guaranteed for enteric fever. So what is actually needed, you may repeat this test after some time, and if you find a rising titer, that will suggest the diagnosis of the enteric fever. So naturally, the toxic picture in this enteric fever and the persistence of high fever with additional of other investigation like blood culture and Vidal test, and naturally CBC finding will remain the same in all these three conditions because either it is normal or low. But in enteric fever, very important is eosinopenia. So if eosinophil levels are very low, in addition to the prolonged fever, anyway, one must think of a little important clinical or a lab investigation. Most of the time we just not focus on this point. So eosinophil count is eosinopenia is very important feature of enteric fever along with other signs. As far as the malaria is concerned, so it is important the endemicity. So now at this time, since we are not having that endemicity in malaria, but in case when malaria is endemic, so even if you don't have any proof for malarial parasite in form of demonstration of malarial parasite either in the slide or rapid antigen test. I think to treat malaria empirically also is good rather than just missing the diagnosis. But at this time when we are not having malaria at this time, so naturally one should go for investigations for malaria of PBF exam, good PBF examination as well as this examination. But certainly one must consider that the liver enzymes, if it is raised, or there could be so many other manifestations of malaria like renal and other manifestation, it must be kept in mind. But if endemicity is there, okay, treating empirically malaria in addition to whatever you're thinking, I think this will be the best choice to give. And
Thank you,
Dr.
sir.
Gupta or Dr. Lalit wants to add something.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
I think it was excellent meeting. Thank you, Dr. Khatri sir. As I said, your bag of wisdom is always overfull, and we are fortunate that we continuously get the nectar out of your storage, which doesn't really get empty. I am thankful to Dr. R.K. Gupta, thankful to Dr. Sajan. Your each question had 4 questions. So that shows how much, you kept all the panelists at bay. And I am thankful to Minal for supporting because we doctors are very poor in the technical aspect, and you helped us out. We are not able to share the screen. And last but not least, this program would not have been possible without support from the team from Eris. They worked hard not only to provide this technical platform, but also to spread the message. And we had wonderful gathering, wonderful interaction. I would like to invite the National Sales Manager of Eris, Mr. Jitendra Shah, to please propose a vote of thanks.
So thank you very much. I think you have given us a wonderful opportunity to join with Pedia Gastro Rajasthan. And I am also thankful to all the delegates for the support for our brands like Raricap and Calcine P and making this brand #1 in the India basically. Sir, I'm also very confident that you will pass on the benefit to our recent launch of ZD Plus, the only brand with full RDA of vitamins, zinc, vitamin A, vitamin C, and vitamin D with minerals and multi-minerals. Thank you very much once again to all the delegates as well as all the panelists, Dr. Anupam Sibbal, Dr. R.K. Gupta, Dr. P.C. Khatri, Dr. Lalit, Dr. Sajjan and Dr. Natwar. The way I think the coordinations and the time which you have provided us was wonderful. And from our bottom of heart, we appreciate your efforts and making this webinar very successful. And Eris is always eager and excited to having participate in such kind of programs, sir. Thank you once again to all the delegates and all the panelists.
Thank you. Thank you.
Over to you, Lalit. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Sir. Thank you. Thank you, Khatri
good
sir.
night.
Thank you, Sajjan. Sajjan for nice questions and nice moderation. He has done great work.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
Sir,
you.
there is one question is still unanswered.
That
Dr.
is-
Rohit Khurana, how
Yes.
to correct metabolic acidosis in acute liver failure?
So Dr. Sibbal was the best person to answer, but he had to go, and he has even given half an hour extra to us. So I think some ICU person can answer. Otherwise, routinely, if you consider, if you it is routine a good fluid therapy and partial correction by soda bicarb, I think that is the key. But I think Lalit or Sajjan, you can say something more. That would be better.
Yeah, basically,
Dr. Lalit, sir?
many a times, we overdo fluid restriction, which is not warranted. That can be a cause of acidosis. So we have to optimally, optimize the fluid balance. That will take care of significant acidosis. And if there is still acidosis going on, we have to look for whether there is, renal failure setting in or a septicemia, because these are the 2 risk factors with acute liver failure, apart from encephalopathy and coagulopathy. So these 4 things we have to monitor. And once we are able to look at all these 4 angles, I think the outcome will be better. So I think, thank you. We had a very good time. Good night, all of you. And we hope to see you in the next meeting, which will be on the 2nd Friday of the next month. Till then, good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good night,
Good night
Natwar.
to
Good
all,
night.
sir.
Good night, Khatri sir. Good night. Good night. Good night, Khatri sir. Good night, Sajjan.
Good night, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
Sir, namaste. Pranam, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Khatri sir.
Thank you, sir. Good night, sir. Pranam.
Thank you. Thank you. अच्छा network.
Thank you, sir.
Doing well. बढ़िया.
Pranam, sir.
Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay.